Printers, Part 2. In this nugget, we'll continue our discussion of printers with Part 2, where I'll start off, first of all, with just kind of a photo review of a few of the components we talked about in our last video. And then we'll also talk about various consumables that we have to replace within the printers, things that we started out talking about in our last nugget. We'll again use some photographs to illustrate those things as well here. Then we'll talk about installing a local printer. There can be many, many steps to this depending on the drivers that are involved in the software and so forth. We'll start off with, again, locally installed printers. This means that they're directly attached to your computer using a USB port, a parallel port, and the like. And then we also will conclude our discussion here with a brief discussion of page description language, which is laser specific, and it talks about the kind of formatting for your pages that is printed out. Alright, as we get this video started, I first of all want to point you to some photographs to kind of cement in our mind some of the things we talked about in our last video, and we'll start off here with just a fuser. This is a fuser in the back of a Samsung ML2250. I've been using this printer for a few years. It's a pretty good printer. Never had a problem with it. Here's the fuser, as I mentioned. Notice that it does get hot. This one gets to 356 degrees Fahrenheit. Some fusers or printers are scheduled to shut down if they overheat for some reason, so that if they get to 400 or 410 degrees, for example, they might shut down to avoid some kind of a hazard. Now, these can be field replaceable units. If you look around them to the sides, there might be a couple of screws on each side or somewhere. It's usually fairly obvious how to remove this item. And once you've gotten the part back from the manufacturer, you'll usually have to order this. You can't get them off the shelf. Then the reinstallation is pretty simple as well. You just screw them back in, and then there's a power cord over here that plugs in over to the side, which is how the halogen light that heats up this fuser gets its power. And then here we have just the pickup roller. I talked about this in the previous nugget as well, the previous video. And this is just a roller that sucks in, if you will, the paper as it goes into the printer. It's usually a softer, kind of a textured rubber that allows it to pull in the paper and make good contact with the paper. Also in our last nugget, we talked about upgrading memory on a printer. We'll talk about that a little bit in this nugget as well. But here's, I just took off the back access panel to the same printer I've been discussing, this Samsung. And we can see where we can put two DIMM modules in here. You'll have to look at the manual for whichever printer you're working with to see how much memory it can accept and more specifics about the kind of memory that it accepts. But you can see even here, right on the printed circuit board, that it will accept DIMM, some kind of a DIMM memory. So we have that capability. Also, you can see here that the inside part of the parallel port, on the outside you'll have these wire portions here that you fold down over the connector, the Centronics connector, to hold it in place. And then, we can't see this here either, but just FYI, this is the USB housing right here. On the outside of this printer, right over the corner there, would be my USB connection. And then this is just the back of a printer. This is my Hewlett-Packard Color LaserJet 2605DN. And we can see here that it accepts both a USB connection and an Ethernet connection. Now, let me just discuss some of the pros and cons of these. With the Ethernet, after I've installed the drivers and associated software on my computer, I can plug in a USB cable into my computer, and the other end, of course, goes right here. And then the drivers that have been installed on my computer will take care of the rest, and plug and play will work properly. So that's an easy way to configure this. The difficulty there might be if I want to share that same printer, then my computer has to be turned on. And the way other users can access this same printer is only by kind of using a conduit of my computer where I've already got it installed. And then all the print jobs that they send actually go through my computer and then through the USB cable on into the printer here. So what that means then is that if I go on sabbatical for a month and I'm out of the office for 4 weeks, my computer's turned off the whole time, and everybody's going to wonder how in the world is they're supposed to be able to print. They can't seem to figure out why nothing prints anymore. Well, that's because this computer's turned off and it's no longer making the sharing accessible. Whereas if I use an Ethernet connection like this, I just plug that into my hub or my switch or patch panel, wherever the other end of that Ethernet cable will go, and then it's going to be constantly available to all of the users on the network, provided it's been installed properly for them, and we'll talk about installing drivers later here. And then they don't have to wait for my computer to come on in order to be able to use that printer. Now I have some other photographs to show you as well, but that relates to some of these things that I've listed on this page, so I'll just show them to you as I go. Now, for these whiteboards that I'm going to use in this particular video, I've taken and derived most of the information directly from the A+ exam objectives because they have quite a few of them listed there for printers in all of the different exams. So I want to make sure that we address a lot of these different things. First of all, with these printer consumables, they have ribbon that you're going to have to use. Now, we talked about that a little bit in our last nugget, so I won't exhaust that. But generally speaking, you're just going to have a supply reel and a take-up reel, and it's going to supply some kind of a ribbon over to the take-up reel, and as it goes across here, the print head either impacts it or melts, depending on the kind of a media it is. Remember, dot matrix will impact, and thermal will melt whatever material is on here onto a piece of paper. Now, this whole thing will often appear in some kind of a cartridge as well to make it easier to work with and to install into the printers and with less mess. For ink, you can re-ink these. Once it's gone all the way over to the take-up reel, you can rewind it for a lot of these, and then you can just get ink that you squirt inside of the cartridge somehow. It can turn out to be quite a mess, but especially if a business is on a tight budget, they a lot of times will re-ink those. Anything that's meltable, however, though, you're not going to be able to do that. You just have to replace the whole cartridge. And then for solid ink, what you do with these is if you run out of any of the solid ink in the reservoir for that printer, of course you can just get a box of Crayolas and stick some crayons in there. No, just kidding. You don't ever want to do that. What you'll do is you'll get from the manufacturer their own inks, and these are the Xerox inks. You can't really tell probably here, but they're all shaped slightly differently, so they'll only fit into one reservoir. And that way I won't accidentally take the magenta ink, or the magenta, I keep trying to call these ink, but the magenta solid and try to put it into the cyan solid tank reservoir. So fortunately that helps to prevent that kind of a mix-up. Then, of course, we'll have the ever-common inkjet ink that we'll see. And here's just some examples of inkjet ink. Here's the inkjet reservoirs. I have to be able to replace one of these whenever I get a status message that identifies one of these as either being low or being out. And I'll just give you an example of that here. There will be a software piece, at least with the printer that I'm using here, that will identify whenever I'm low on one of these. For example, I just replaced the yellow, but before I did that, it had a big red X on there saying it was totally out. Before that, it gives you, I think it's a yellow caution symbol that identifies the problem. And naturally, because Epson wants to make it convenient for you to spend your hard-earned money with them, they give you a link directly right here so that you can just go buy ink from them. So then when you decide to replace the ink cartridge, you can either use an interface from within the software piece that accompanies the drivers for that printer, and you may be able to control the movement of this head so that it goes to a certain location, allowing you to remove these cartridges. When the printer is at rest, it actually goes over to the right. In this case, your printer may vary, but it goes over a pad that is able to soak up any kind of loose droplets of ink or any leaks or anything like that. So what we want to do is to return it to this position so that I can access all the cartridges, because otherwise it'd be underneath this cover over here and there's no way to access all the cartridges. You can do that again through the computer itself if it supplies that, or in my particular case there's some buttons over to the right that are out of view right now. You just push those to be able to move this over. Then we just simply take this and flip it up. It exposes all the cartridges, and I can replace it with a new cartridge. I think I got one right here. And it appears in a sealed plastic bag. There's usually some kind of a notch or something like that, which allows you to tear this open to make it easily accessible. And then you simply put it into place. And nowadays, you don't really have to do anything with these inks. Some of the older types of inks, you'd have to remove something or break off a tab or something like that. Nowadays, there's a tab over here. You pretty much just snap it into place, and it's almost goof-proof as well, because if you look at this inkjet, you'll notice that there's colors that line up here with exactly where to place each one of the cartridges. So I can't accidentally put the cyan one into the black cartridge or something. Then as it relates to toner, you'll usually get, again, some kind of a status message if you're out of toner or low on toner. It may appear on the computer, depending on the kind of printer you're working with and the drivers that it has, or it may actually appear on a status, like an LCD screen of some kind, on that printer. And so that's when you're going to know you need to replace it. Also, the symptom that you usually get when you need to replace toner and you haven't either seen the message or you just haven't replaced the toner is that it starts to get faded. It might be faded over to one side, or it might be just an overall fade. One thing you can do to kind of cheat that, if you're really trying to pinch pennies, is you can open up that printer cover, take the toner out, shake it gently from left to right. You don't want to shake it vigorously, because that toner can spill out of the cartridge because there are openings on that cartridge. But once you've shaken it gently from side to side, you can put it back in. You can usually get quite a few more pages out of it once you've redistributed that toner. Let's go ahead and take a look then at some of these toner cartridges. Here's a toner cartridge at the bottom. This is one where it's going to contact the paper. I simply turned this cartridge over. This came again out of my ML2250. And we can remember the laser writes onto this surface. This is a photosensitive drum. We're looking right at the drum itself right here. So since it's exposed to light, obviously, this would have neutralized any image that had already been on there previously, at least electrically speaking. So this is the bottom of it. It has to be open so that it can come in contact with the paper. And then over on the top of that cartridge, we'll see also an opening here. This is a little bit more narrow. And this is where the laser is going to actually write through this narrow slit onto the drum. And also, some printers will require you to replace the drum separately from the toner. Most of them nowadays have the drum, what we see right here, integrated directly into the toner cartridge. So when you replace the toner, you also necessarily replace the drum. Some printers will have those replaced separately, and you'll just have to check with your manufacturer there. And if that's the case, usually the drum can go quite a longer period of time than the toner cartridges, and you can usually go through several toner cartridges before you need to replace the drum. Symptoms of when you might need to replace that drum are if it starts to streak or get indelible marks that don't seem to go away no matter what you do, then it might be time to replace that toner, or rather that drum. And then if you work with color printers, you're going to work with yellow, cyan, magenta, and black, and that's the Y, cyan, magenta, CM, and K for black. And if you work with these kinds of printers a lot, they're usually referred to as CMYK printers for those initials for the different colors. Whether you're replacing conventional black toner in a normal printer or even a copier machine or one of these kinds of toners, what you'll see happen is when you replace one, you just take it and you pull it out. Usually there'll be a handle directly on it, or in this case, there are tabs over on the side that we pull out. You put your hand on each side and pull it out evenly, and it removes it just fine. And then when you replace it with a new one, don't forget that once you open up the sealed plastic bag, which seals out any light to protect the drum, that there will also be a tab in most cases that you have to pull out. It's got a tab and a piece of tape, a plastic piece of tape kind of a thing on there. You pull that out to expose the toner so that the toner would not have gotten shaken out and made a mess inside of that bag in transit. And if you forget to take that tab out and remove that tape-like material, either it won't print or it may not fit in properly. I know with some of these, the tab sticks out on the side, and you really will have a hard time getting this cartridge in there with that tab sticking out, although I think I know some users that might actually succeed in jamming things in there and forcing them to fit. So then, once again, you may have to replace the drum separately from the toner, but nowadays they're normally packaged in the same cartridge. And then you might just have to replace the paper. Sometimes users will just say, the printer's not working. You go down and look at it, guess what? No paper in the printer, so obviously it's not going to be working. One thing you got to be careful of when it comes time to install your printer is that it is compatible. I mean, that can really be a hassle. I've been frustrated with this many times myself, and I know you probably have been too. For example, when Windows XP 64-bit edition came out, me being the guy on the block that wanted to be the first one to have the 64-bit edition, I installed it on my main machine, my main production machine, and I thought everything would be great. Of course, nobody had drivers for Windows XP 64-bit edition, so I couldn't get any of my printers to work. I had to wait a few months before they actually had 64-bit drivers available from the various manufacturers. So that's a big hassle. Also, Windows Vista has come out not too long ago, and a lot of people that have printers, especially older ones that are not necessarily maintained by the manufacturer anymore, and they're not really putting any more effort into further driver updates, they may never become compatible. There may never be an update that users can download from the internet, for example, to update to the latest operating system. The CompTIA exam also mentions operating systems, or rather the exam objectives, and they also mention application compatibility. Rarely, if ever, in the real world, I don't know what world the A+ exam is in, but in the real world, that's seldom, if ever, an issue anymore. And let me explain why that is. You see, applications don't actually print themselves directly to the printer themselves. What they do is they send their print job to the printer driver that Windows handles, and once that application has decided to send the print job to the driver, it no longer cares about that print job anymore. It's gone, let Windows handle it, let the printer driver handle it, so it's not really an issue. In terms of compatibility, it's more an operating system issue more than it would be an application issue. The only reason why I think they could even put that on the exam objectives is possibly because you might have to consider really old applications. I mean applications that might be 15 or 20 years old DOS apps, for example. What they would do when they would try to print is they will try to directly access the hardware themselves. Well, because of security and stability issues, Windows current versions do not allow any applications or any drivers to be able to do that. We called those real mode drivers, ones that would try to directly access the hardware. Well, under current versions of Windows, that's impossible. If you have an old application that's trying to do that, very likely one of two things can happen. Number one, it'll blue screen your computer and it'll reboot it, or it'll lock up, or you just plain will not be able to print at all. So in reality, there is no such thing as compatibility with your applications in relation to the printer or the printer driver. The compatibility really all goes to the operating system. Then when it comes to doing the installation, one thing you have to make sure is that you prepare the hardware correctly. Now this is really not that hard. If you get a brand new printer out of the box, a lot of times right on the top will be a big fold out that'll say something like quick start or fast start, and that's for people like me that don't like to read through the entire manual. I do find that if I just at least use the quick start, it'll save me some time and some heartache because I will not have skipped a step or something like that. But as it relates to the hardware preparation, one big part of that is to identify where all the tape is that locks different things down within that printer, because it's designed to hold it in place during transit so that the head or the carriage and all those things, those moving parts, don't slide back and forth and potentially damage something. So don't leave any of that tape in place, because when you turn the power on, it could strip out a cog, or it could ruin the motor, or make some really annoying noises that are quite alarming. Also, the A+ exam objectives call for knowing how to make the proper connections. Geez, this is about as easy as it can get. I think you already know how to plug in a parallel port, to plug in a USB cable, all those sorts of things. So it's really no big deal, but I put it on there because it's part of the objectives. Now let's go ahead and talk about installing drivers. As I've mentioned many times already in this series, typically, especially for a USB-based type of printer or a multifunction printer, you install the drivers and probably any software applications that came with that printer in advance before you actually plug in the printer. Alright, so what I've done here is I've simply put the CD for one of my printers into the tray. I can't even remember the model number of this printer. I guess I better go look at it. Walking around to the other side of the desk. What is it? It's an HP OfficeJet 6210 XI all-in-one. It's one of those multi-function printers because, I'm one of those poor small business owners that can't afford fancy office equipment. So I just got an all-in-one kind of a thing here. So once the autoplay takes place with that CD, I just click on Next. Now I haven't actually turned on the power of that printer or plugged in the USB port into my computer yet. I don't want to do that because this is one of those devices that if you look at that big fold-out sheet that says Quick Start, it says to always install the drivers first, and that will be important here. Now at this point, and you may run into this with the drivers you install for whatever your printers are as well, they will offer to check the internet to see if there are any later updates for this installation. I'm going to say no for the time being just to save some time, but obviously you can say yes if you want to get the more up-to-date information. Now, the full or express installation, this full one of course installs the device drivers, you always have to have that, and HP Image Zone software. And you can pause the screen if you want to read the description of both of those. But this, again, will vary from one manufacturer to the other. So this is not something that will be carved in stone for all of us. But usually there will be some kind of a full or custom or full or express or something like that. There may also be like minimal installs, which don't use quite so many megabytes on the hard drive. And I don't know if you saw it just then, but this full installation is going to require over 700 megabytes between all the applications and everything that are necessary to get this printer working. And here we get the license agreement. You can go ahead and read through that if you like, and I'll just go ahead and read. Okay, I read the whole thing. At least I claim to, so I say that I accept the terms in the license agreement because I read carefully through the whole thing. Some of those won't let you click on next unless you scroll all the way to the end. Just depends. And then you can have some extended capabilities installed if you want as well. And this is something where it says install HP extended capabilities as if you receive additional benefits from this. Really, it's sending information to Hewlett-Packard, although it says that they'll never send personal information to you, but it will send other information. You can pause that if you want to as well. I'll say do not install that right now, just to save a little bit of time, and click on Next. Then I identify where I want to install it in my file system. The default location is just fine. So I'll click on Next, and now it'll start to download all the files from the CD to the local hard drive. This will take a while, so I'll resume recording when it's finished. Alright, now I got to this point in the driver installation where it tells me to make sure my device is powered on and connect the USB cable. This is where we actually plug it into the computer. Now, let me also pause for a moment. You may notice this red thing up here in the corner. Offline here, while the driver was installing, let me tell you about a problem that occurred that you will probably also run into from time to time. The CD that I was installing all of this from had a scratch on it, and so it was not able to read one of the files off of the CD. So all I did was I went to Hewlett-Packard's website and downloaded this. I think it's 230 megabytes or something like that. It's pretty large. Let's see how big it is by right-clicking and choosing properties. Oh, 274 megabyte file. And then I double-clicked on it. It took about 5 minutes to extract all the files and then launch this whole thing again. As far as the dialog boxes are concerned, up to this point, they all looked exactly the same as the one I already showed you. So, okay, right now I'm going to go ahead and pause recording, run around to the other side of my computer, plug in the USB cable, and we'll see what happens. Okay, I think I can actually reach this printer with my headset on without taking anything off, so I'll just go ahead and do this live here while I'm... Boy, I got a lot of dust bunnies back here behind this computer. I think I need to clean up around here is what I probably need to do. Okay, I plugged in the printer now through the USB cable, and we should see a little action going on down here. This little symbol down here means that it is detecting that hardware. And every now and then, I don't know if you can see them, because sometimes the recording software doesn't record this, but the little word balloons that pop up down here in the notification area identified that it did detect this HP 6210 series. And then we get this item in the background. You may or may not need to do anything with this. Sometimes you'll have to next finish through this as it detects the various drivers, or it tries to install the various drivers. This time I didn't have to do that because the driver installed itself, but you will see that from time to time as well. And we've seen that dialog box before. I know it didn't show up entirely this time, but we've seen that dialog box before in a previous nugget when I did another hardware installation. So now it tells me that the product connected successfully. All I have to do now is to click Next to continue. That's pretty much it. In terms of the drivers, now look what it says though. All the necessary files for my product will now be installed. Could take up to 35 minutes. So this is kind of a lengthy installation. And once again, I'll next through this until it gets to a stopping point, and I'll do the rest of the installation offline. Let me also point out, by the way, as long as we're still waiting for this to finish, that sometimes with various types of devices you install, including printers, you might get that message that you've probably all seen before that says, these drivers are not signed, and it gives you a yellow exclamation point and the sky is falling and so forth. That's a message that at times Microsoft will give you from the operating system. This is their warning to you that they have not thoroughly tested this driver for stability purposes. So it could be a poorly written driver that will cause your screen to spontaneously blue screen and reboot, or have create a memory leak, which is where it will use memory, and then when it's done using that memory, it doesn't actually give it back to the system, so it just kind of leaves it open. And memory that can't be used by anything else, so it causes your system to slow down. Anyway, lots of different kinds of problems can occur with unsigned drivers. They are definitely the best way to go if you can get signed drivers. Now, since I didn't get that message here, that means that it was installing only signed drivers. And that's a digital signature that Microsoft uses to accompany those drivers to confirm that they've been thoroughly tested and confirmed as stable by Microsoft. All right, then I'm not going to go through a whole lot of effort with this, but I'll just quickly go through the fax setup wizard, which is the last part of this installation process. Again, this will vary from one software piece to the next, so I'm not going to teach you HP's way of doing it. I'm just going to do this real quick here and go on through and next finish. Here then it asks if I want to use separate fax and voice lines, and that's what I do have in my my office, so I'll go ahead and select that option and then click on Next. Now the next page, I happen to know, has you put in your fax number. I'm not going to do that because guess what? I'm already getting junk faxes where people send me advertisements for vitamins or investment plans or insurance of some kind or another, so I don't want to advertise that fax number any more than I absolutely have to right now. So I entered in that fax number on the previous page, and here I'd enter in my phone number. No, I'm not sharing that either. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. This is going to be omitted from my fax cover sheet if I don't use a number here. That's okay for my current purposes. Here it asks what I use for internet service. I don't use a modem. Instead, I use a cable modem, which is different than what they're asking for here. They just want to know if a PC modem, which uses a telephone line, accesses the internet. I don't do that anymore, and a lot of people don't anymore because that's kind of becoming antiquated in the days of broadband here. Now this is an issue because DSL actually takes place over your phone line, so that could affect your fax service, so they want to know if there's DSL service on the fax line. In my case, there's not. Next here then, I could run a fax test. That might be kind of handy to do, so I'll just go ahead and run that to make sure that I'm working okay, everything's plugged in properly, and so forth. And this is something, if you have any kind of diagnostic software that accompanies your devices, this is always a good idea to run through this thing. So if your phone line's unplugged, for example, it'll tell you that it's not getting a dial tone. Now, if you're in certain other countries that are not in North America, you might not get a dial tone, because not all countries use a dial tone. You just pick up the phone and you start dialing. Here in North America, you pick up the phone and it goes me, it gives you that sound. Obviously, the test passed, so great. Thank you very much, Hewlett-Packard. You didn't humiliate me in front of all the listeners here. So now I can then go ahead and click on Next to finish up the wizard. So then I simply click on Next and then Finish, and that's pretty much it. And then, of course, here it asks me to sign up with HP so I can give them my email and stuff so that they can send me product notifications and the like. I think I'll click Cancel for right now, and I'll say, don't ever remind me again. Thank you very much. If I want to learn more about the product, of course, I can tour it, or I can click on HP Director, which you see right here. There's also an icon for it on the desktop. I almost called it a sticker. I have a young daughter who calls these things stickers instead of shortcuts. So anyway, then it opens up Directory here, and I can do things like send a fax, scan something, scan a picture, and so forth. I'll just minimize that for now and click on Done. Next, let's go ahead and address page description languages, and that's what these next couple of things here are. But before I do that, it'd be better to describe these by showing you how other methods of printing take place. For example, with a dot matrix, let's say that it wants to print this line of text right here. We'll just represent it in this box. And it might send an instruction, say here, write the letter A. And this is instructions that are being sent to that printer, and the printer interprets those instructions, and it says, okay, I interpret that as letter A here. Then for the next space, it might say, print nothing here. Okay, the printer has to acknowledge, print nothing here. Then print the letter B. Print nothing here, print the letter C, print nothing here, print the letter D. So each one of these get an instruction. Even where there's actually nothing being printed at all between these letters, it still gets instructions that it has to process, and it says, oh, don't print anything there? Fine, I'll go ahead and do that. You see, that's very inefficient, though, for laser printers, which have to process an entire page at one time before they print the page out. For dot matrix types of printers and other kinds of impact printers and certain printers like this, one line at a time, even if there's nothing in there, even if it receives a specific instruction not to print something, that's probably okay. But it's not efficient for a full page, because it would be like someone giving you directions on how to get somewhere. They might say, when you get to this street, don't turn there. When you get to Elm Street, don't turn there. That would be a real nightmare. Get it? Nightmare. No. Anyway, when you get to Union Street, don't turn there. You keep going. You go past Roosevelt Street, but don't turn there. You go past First Street, but don't turn there. And then they finally say, but turn right on Lemon Hill Drive. Okay. Now, people give me instructions like that sometime when I get directions to go somewhere, and I say, why are you telling me all these places not to turn? That's just confusing. Just tell me where to turn. That's it. Well, it's kind of the same thing with a page description language. It would be inefficient for laser printers to be able to get all the information about where not to print, especially because they have to divide the whole page up into a grid, and if it's like a 600 dpi print resolution, then they have to divide it up into 600 dots per inch, and they'd have to receive an instruction for every single dot. Well, these printer languages, or page description languages, only describe where to print. In other words, they don't give you all the streets not to turn on. They just say, when you get to Lemon Hill Drive, turn right and print the letter A, that kind of a thing. Adobe Systems came out with PostScript. That was one of the early page description languages. One of the advantages of it was when letters would get enlarged in the old days, let's say we took the letter A here. I'm sorry, that looks pretty bad, but took letter A here, and it looks okay when it's smaller, but if something took place where we enlarged that, or we made it larger and put it on a larger sheet of paper or something, we'd start to get these jagged edges along the side. You know what I'm talking about. And it's kind of these squarish looking jagged edges. Well, PostScript would allow us to enlarge fonts and enlarge graphics nearly indefinitely. Really, it's mostly true for fonts. Graphics need a different solution, but it's a pretty good solution for laser printing. And now, Hewlett-Packard came out with something else called the Printer Control Language, or PCL. I think the current version is version 6, but regardless, A lot of other printer manufacturers have also adopted PCL, even though it's a Hewlett-Packard technology. It works pretty well, and that's probably the majority of laser printers right now are standardized on PCL, although PostScript certainly is still an option for you. Many printers will support both PostScript and PCL, and what happens then is if you install the PCL driver, you have to make sure that PostScript is not configured on the printer, and that'll be usually configured through some kind of a panel or something, or a menu system, usually on the face of that printer. Vice versa is also true. If you install the PostScript driver, make sure that the printer is not configured for a PCL interpretation of those page instructions. If these are mismatched, then what you'll usually get is just a page that's printed out full of a bunch of gibberish, and all you're getting at that point are more or less literal instructions themselves without the actual interpretation of those instructions. Now, GDI here is actually more of a Windows item. It's a Windows component, and there are some laser printers that use GDI. What this means is that all of the processing for how to format the letters and all of that kind of stuff will be handled by Windows instead. This also means that it's going to be very processor and possibly memory intensive, but more than likely mostly processor intensive, and so it's going to slow down your computer while it's processing that print job. I don't really see a whole lot of GDI printers anymore. That stands, by the way, for Graphics Device Interface. Really, the only advantage for that is that the printer manufacturer doesn't have to install as fast of a processor in the printer itself, or as expensive a processor, because with these others two, the printers themselves are responsible for all that processing. Well, with GDI, Windows does it instead, and so they can use a cheap processor in the printer. You get a very low-cost leader with that kind of printer. But nowadays, even laser printers are so inexpensive that it's really not that much of an issue anymore. You might as well just go with PostScript or PCL. In this nugget, we continue our discussion of printers with part 2, where we start off with kind of a photo review of some of the various components that I talked about in our last nugget, and then we talked about some of the consumables, which I also used some photographs to illustrate, but we have to identify what kinds of things we have to replace in these printers. We talked also about and demonstrated the installation of a local printer, local meaning it's directly attached to my own computer, and then we concluded with page description language discussions on the various formats for PDL. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.